just how I'm feeling, though I never wanted you another way. But baby, it's been on my mind, and you know my face can't hide it. So take my hand and hear me when I say, don't you know that I'll be there for you, with a love to get you through the night, yeah. And I'll be there for you when everything is out of sight. You got it, baby. One more time, you got to get it right and walk it while it's life for you. And honey, if you die, then I'ma get you by, but don't already die.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. It's episode 68 of the Adam Makes Beer Industry Pro Podcast. Today, I'm excited to be chatting with Chris Lewington of Brew Resourceful. Before we get rolling, let me give a shout out to our fantastic sponsors that make content like this possible. Starting a brewery is a big step. Blickman Engineering is here to help. Since 2006, they've equipped hundreds of nano breweries for success. Their new 3.5 barrel Pro Surface electric brewing system cuts maintenance and saves at least 30 minutes per brew with powerful under kettle heating. From 1 to 15 barrel brew houses to keg washers and grain mills, Blickman has what you need. Ready to go pro? Contact Filler Tom at ProSeries at blickmanengineering.com. Blickman Engineering is a proud sponsor of this channel and loves to help brewers at every stage of their journey. Tracking and managing the financial health of your brewery is a primary pillar of success. Check out my boy David Lentz at Brewed Fiscally. This man has the industry experience and skills you need so you can focus on growing your business. Bookkeeping, fractional CFO support, financial management system design, business plan review, hit up your boy. Check him out at brewedfiscally.com or shoot him an email at david@brewedfiscally.com. He's good people. Today's guest is Chris Lewington, and he has spent his career working with breweries of all sizes, helping them reduce cost, improve efficiency, and lower carbon emissions. Over the past 2 years, his company, Brew Resourceful, has worked with leading names in the industry such as Northern Monk, Full Circle, Murphy & Sons, and Vault City to deliver practical, process-based solutions that enhance profitability and sustainability. Chris is also a regular speaker at global brewing industry events, sharing his expertise on decarbonizing operations and creating more resource-efficient breweries. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Adam. What an honor to be here. You came on my show not that long ago, and it's so cool to be on the reverse side of it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it's interesting because there's of course plenty of podcasts out there, but there's not a ton with those of us that have have done it professionally or are doing it professionally, and then are providing resources in that range. So why don't you tell us a little bit about dipping into that brewing side of it? Did you how many years did you make beer professionally?
I started making beer professionally in about 2014, 2015. So I'd say like making beer for 10 years. I think that's what I go with. Maybe there's a bit of rounding up in there. I think it was about 9 years in total. I joined the UK craft beer scene kind of not the start of it, but pretty much at the start. Like 2015 was just as it was, like 2014, 2015 is just as it started having its lift-off moment, which I think it probably had in the States a few years before. But yeah, it's been fun, man. I mean, I think there's nothing more fun in the world than making beer. I kind of miss that I don't do that day to day sometimes anymore.
What was that ride like? Because here in the United States we have some beer history, but it's not as long as as European countries and some other places. I always thought it was interesting that by and large, people are immigrating to the United States and they are bringing along some styles with them, but they were having to put themselves in a situation where they had to try to create those beers with slightly different ingredients. So we're kind of, as beer makers here in the United States, we're always kind of mimicking something from the past with some tweaks. UK has a much deeper brewing history. So I'm interested in, even just your thoughts on what that was like, because I've always wanted to be able to go over there and drink maybe some of the styles that people think are boring. You know what I mean? But as coming from a country where you have that brewing history, how did that impact the craft scene? Was the craft scene kind of rejecting that stuff there?
Yeah, I think so we have like what we call family brewers. So these are the brewers who have probably got a family name still on the door and have been going for hundreds of years, making real ale, making really high quality beer for publicans. They kind of get a bit cheesed off about the whole craft beer movement, I think, right at the start, because they're like, we've been making good products the whole time. We've been making good quality beer our whole lives. All of a sudden, a bunch of guys in beards and plaid shirts come along. Like, we've reinvented it, man. And everyone's like, not really. But there was a lot of pushback on those traditional styles for sure. I think it's quite common in most markets and just human nature, but it's quite cyclical. And those styles that were very pushed back at the start are now being like absorbed back in as the darlings and love of the UK beer scene. It's kind of funny when you said that you would come over, you would take styles and make them differently. And then what we were doing as a craft beer scene is looking at what the States was doing and copying and bringing that over. So it's like a really weird little circle of styles there. But yeah, I think that we have done, I think since the craft beer movement it exploded. Everything was so new styles every week, new breweries every week, new festivals, new awards. And now it's like, as it's plateaued slightly from that growth phase, I feel that we care a lot more about the traditions of our sort of brewing heritage here. There's a huge respect amongst everyone, definitely now, and probably always has been. Cask beer is still, for me personally, it's the ultimate brewing product because it's drank without with little carbonation and a bit warmer than your traditional craft beers. So there is just nowhere to hide in these things. And I really appreciate that. I think it's like, as I said, it's like when you get a really good cask beer, you're like, they've nailed that. They've nailed it. And so is the supply chain, the pub, the conditioning. Like, it's a thing of beauty, I think.
Sure.
Cask beer's market has been absolutely demolished here for a while. It's the race to the bottom on price. There's huge wastage associated with it, but it is spiking back up. There's a bunch of figures that came out from SIBA last year that looks like the craft side and the cask beer market is back on a small rise, which is much needed because that's a big heritage for us.
Sure. You mentioned kind of, here in the US, we start off by mimicking styles. And then when we started, you can take it either way. We started destroying styles or creating new ones or whatever, with the more is always better mantra that was definitely there for a while. What did you see the stuff that in the beer scene by you that was being chased, as far as stuff that was being mimicked here in the US? What were those things that you see kind of pull in that direction?
I mean, both coast IPAs, West Coast at the start, and then more of the New England style. Definitely New England. That was a big change for a lot of people here. I mean, craft beer was the first. I would say they were the first people to challenge the clear beer mantra here in the UK. And if there was any sort of cloud in any beer, it used to be sent back 15, 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. It would just be rejected. What on earth is this? Whereas that's changed quite substantially now. People are quite okay with a hazy beer. But I think like the IPAs really were where we were looking across. I think some of that's to do with the hop quality as well, and just the fact that the access to the really good quality and new age hops, and like that was, that's very much it feels like a lot of a US product anyway. I know it's traditionally not been, a lot of British people be fuming at me for that, but it feels like the craft beer world's definitely adopted those American hops as their sort of core, and it was mainly IPA styles that I think everyone was looking over the coast or over, looking and seeing how great they were. And there were some some absolutely outstanding IPAs over in the States, but we've done a pretty good job over here now of getting good quality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Did you feel like, actually, just dipping back into the production side, walk me a little through getting into the industry and kind of what that path was like for you, and kind of what you did when you were kind of day to day on the production side of things.
Yeah. I mean, Adam, to be honest, just like every brewer, I have the same story of how I got into beer, which is basically didn't want to do anything else and was like, this looks like a really good fun time. And I actually care about it. So that's what I did. Unfortunately for me, I found that out during my uni degree. So it was quite an expensive time to figure out that I didn't want to follow economics. But I actually got an opportunity to work in I'm going to call it a British pub in the States. So in upstate New York in like 2012, 2013 time. And before then I had a lot of love for beer, but it was mainly just for the vast quantities that I could drink at uni. It wasn't really, I didn't know really what a hop was, to be honest. But then when I came out here, I saw what was happening in the States. Oh, this is the coolest thing. Like, it was just, and everyone I met, I always remember that. And it always kind of stuck with me, is everyone I met was just so fun and like looked like they were enjoying their lives. And I was like, that is the industry that I want to be in. I mean, yeah, no one was well paid and whatever, but you know, everyone was just having a great time and super friendly. And I was like, this looks so fun. So yeah, my path into the industry was just like everyone else. But as I said, when I got back, there wasn't that many breweries, 2014, 2015 era, that was really making a lot of, were hiring a lot of people. So I had to email every brewery in the north of England, and I got 2 responses. One from Timmy Taylor's, which said they have Timothy Taylor's here, which is like iconic cask beer. They said that they have such a low turnover of staff, it's unlikely I'd get a job in the next 10 years. Pretty reasonable. And then one other brewery that said yes. But I actually started working in sales, which was just a disaster for everyone involved. I'm not really much of a Like, I look young now. Imagine me waltzing around in pubs when I was like 21. I looked about 13. Like, I was going around like, oh, does anyone want to buy some beer? They're like, do you have ID, mate? Like,
get this kid out of here.
Yeah, get out. Chancellor, that's sling your hook. So yeah, I learned the hard way that was not the right career path for me. But then I just fell in, I'd always been following how to make beer. I'd been doing a bit of homebrew very unsuccessfully. Yeah. And I just got into the brewing and I was like, I love this. This is what I want to do. And from there I worked. I was Daleside, that brewery that employed me first. And I went to Thornbridge, which is that's one of the original craft breweries here. They make a really iconic beer called Jaipur. It was like 5.9%. Which at the time, I think it's over 20 years old now, which at the time was like huge, like 50 IBUs, which is shocking over here. Everyone's like, Like, it was an amazing beer. One of the staples, and I got to make that with some amazing brewers there. Like, their quality focus was head and shoulders above anyone was doing really in the country. So it was really cool to be a part of that. And then I moved to Beavertown, which not everyone will probably know on your stream, but they're like the second biggest craft brewery now in the UK, just behind Brewdog, really, in terms of volume. Probably won't be long before they overtook. But when I started, we were doing like 20,000 hectoliters a year. Sure. Just the perfect story, really. Like, great artwork, great culture. The owner was like, the owner Logan was just such a nice guy. Has a great story himself, and the brand just flew. And I was really fortunate to be during the growth phase. And I feel like when that industry's in the growth phase and the brewery's in the growth phase, you get exposed to a lot very quickly. You're going from going through the roles, through the responsibilities. All of a sudden it's like contract brew. I was helping manage the contract brewing. We were contract brewing over 100,000 hectoliters a year. And I've only been in this company for like 2.5 years. Like, it was just crazy growth, but it was so fun. And then we got to build a new brewery just outside of London, which is where I live still, in a place called Enfield. And it was an amazing brewery, probably the most modern, technological wise in all of Europe. And got to lead the commissioning on that. It was probably my my most favorite part. And then I was managing a team there. So the irony of that journey was I left. I didn't want to be working for Shell or IBM back when I was at uni, and because I didn't want to be a middle manager in a corporate structure. And then by the end of it, that's exactly what I've become. Sure. It all roads leads to the middle management in a corporate structure. It always does.
Well, and I think we're pushed in that direction, even if like it's not necessarily the direction we want to go, because it can be a challenge to. You've been putting in the time. You do want to make more money because our industry does not, blow the doors off when it comes to the checks typically. So yeah, and so you take those roles, and then sometimes you end up finding yourself a little bit outside of where you wanted to be. You were talking before about, breweries growing, breweries blowing up.
Yeah.
There's a phenomenon here in the US. I feel like when a brewery starts off small, they get a big following, and then they grow and they blow up. They become regional. They're shipped out to 35 different states, or they go, national. They're all over the country. For some folks, there is a resentment. Okay, they stop liking that brewery. When I'm familiar with several of these breweries, and hands down, they're making better shelf-stable, technically sound beers compared to when, for me, like a 10-barrel, like a pub system or something, something small, where they probably had a boatload of issues where you couldn't be putting something into package and putting on store shelf warm. But, even though they're making that beer better, people don't want places to get big. Is that a shared experience there by you as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Adam, man. That is it's kind of word for word what we went through at Beavertown as well. As I said, we've become this, like, we were the neighborhood brewery that blew up, but that success was, I think people were really, really enjoying it for a while, and then the inevitable deal with Heineken came along, and then that put a swift dagger in that in that love. Let me tell you,
swift dagger. I like that. Yes.
That balloon got popped pretty quick. It was madness. I've never experienced anything like it. It was like you went from like one of the coolest brands to like one of the most hated brands in like literally the space of 5 minutes. It was mental. I've never seen anything like it. But yeah, I think a lot of there was always that. I remember it as well because it kind of got to me, because I remember I was working at Beavertown. We made our flagship beer was called Neck Oil. People used to come to me and be like, Neck Oil's not the same as it used to be. I was like, oh my God, I got so many analytical tests to say that's not true. I was like, I just had to sit there and be like, yeah, man, cool.
Yeah.
But like, it's funny. It really taught me about what a brand and what a beer really is, and why beer has been around for 5,000 years as a product, because it is something that it brings people together. And I feel that when they feel that that's no longer the case, they turn on it, and it's kind of just like a community thing rather than a specific beer related problem. Because I think that, as I said, like just like you said, I've seen so many of these beers that have got analytically better shelf life, they taste fresher for longer, etc. But then it's just lost that magic. And that's kind of, I see it from both sides. It's just funny when someone comes to you and says, God, that Neck Oil's terrible now. And you're like, thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
You were mentioning, kind of your path growing your career on the industry side. And I know your focus now is on efficiency and sustainability. Was that something that you kind of went into the industry with a passion for, or was that something that was developed during your time?
Really funny you should ask that, actually, because I was doing a talk at the sustainability conference here not that long ago. And just before I got on, I actually ended up saying this exact thing on stage. But I was just like, I kind of reflected on why I ended up stood on this stage speaking to people about sustainability, because efficiency and sustainability, sustainability itself has not been like, I'll be honest, it's not been something I've been super passionate about for the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. In it as a concept, but actually when I thought about it, I always have been, especially around the efficiency side. Like when they were dishing out projects at work, everyone's fighting over the hop trial or the dry hop technique or trialing this latest yeast strain, and I was the one who's buzzing to get the CIP optimization project. And I was just like, that is real nerdy niche stuff. And I was like absolutely buzzing with it. And I ran with it and it saved so much, learned so much. I really loved it. And I was like, that's the side of brewing I've always truly been passionate about. I love I do like recipe development, etc. I've done plenty of it. It is fun, but it's like if I was given a project on efficiency gains, on new capex spend, bringing in a new piece of equipment, that was where I really like thrived more than I thrived over the classic recipe development hop sort of side. So yeah, I guess that it is something I've always had. I just never quite framed it in the way of sustainability, but that's kind of the key thing about sustainability is a lot of it, especially for where it matters in the brewery, it is just efficiency. Like it's just another word for efficiency. It just has a way of calculating that's not just a financial gain, but also an environmental gain as well. And that's kind of how I see sustainability from my side and how I help the industry. I mean, I know loads of people who work in sustainability who are in the whole big picture, but I really am quite focused in the brewery and how that impacts not only the operational cost and the COGS, like the cost of goods sold, but also its environmental impact. And I think that both work really, really well in tandem.
Sure. I originally found your stuff on became aware of you by the Modern Brewer podcast. How long have you been doing that? Did you have like a background in any of that sort of stuff before? Any like interviewing, any video work or any audio work, anything like that?
No, I started it not be far off 2 years now. I wouldn't say. I'm not on episode 68 like you though. I'm a little bit lagging behind there. No. I got a lot of catching up. Yeah, I don't know. So I've never really been like afraid to talk about things on camera or audio. I have never really done it. I did one podcast for the Brewers Journal here, and I kind of thought it'd be edited. And I remember the first time I listened to my own voice back, I was like, I think I was almost sick on my like bike over. I was like, who is that guy? Please tell me it's not me. Horrible. And I was like, probably just got to right the wrongs here, just like couldn't get my words out. Sentences were all over the place. They probably still are, to be honest, but I just don't listen to stuff as often. Yeah, it was good. But I just really wanted to do it, actually. I really loved when I was brewing, I loved and still do the MBAA podcast. Just like thought it was such a fantastic resource, and it made me such a better brewer by listening to them. Like I fascinated, and I was like, "That's great, right? Like there's so much good stuff, but there's so much stuff around brewing that isn't necessarily about making better quality beer that actually would be really interesting to do." To cover. And like the stuff when you're running a brewery or you want to run a brewery or you think about running a brewery, there's just you have to learn. I think the first episode I ever did was on hop contracting, like how to do it. Like again, super niche topic, right? Even brewing's a pretty niche sector, and then craft brewing's even nicher. And then I found the only smallest audience I could possibly achieve. So it was never really made with marketing and audience in mind.
Yes.
And let me tell you, it's still on, actually. I haven't changed it, but that episode it's not the best podcast episode you'll ever listen to. The content is great, but oh my God. I didn't even do an outro. I just finished it. Like, it just
slam shut.
I didn't even say goodbye, just slam the door in the listener's face. And I remember like a few of my friends texted me going, yeah, really cool, man, but would be great if you just said goodbye. I was like,
do something.
Yeah, good feedback. That's solid feedback. So I did really just throw myself into it. I just sat there in my bedroom with a microphone and recorded. I was just like, I can't say it was a particularly well thought out path. I just did it.
Well, no, and I love because like you said, I mean, I don't think there's really any other podcast that I've seen that's specifically focused on the sustainability, the sustainability efficiency side of things. And there's obviously a place for it. And it is, we are talking about a niche of a niche here, right? So, but yeah, there's people out there that are looking for that stuff. Do you find, because I know you also have started and are operating Brew Resourceful, Can you tell me a little bit about what that is, and why you kind of wanted to be going in that direction with things?
Yeah. So it was funny after Beavertown, I moved to the Caribbean for 2 years and worked on a small brewery, right, on a remote island. Beautiful place.
I say it sounds amazing. What you're telling me sounds
really
amazing.
Was.
So,
yeah, and I look out my window now and I see eternal grey skies of England. And I'm like, just remind me why I left. Just remind me one more time. I was thinking of like painting like the beach on my windows to really feel like I'm still there. Maybe turn the heating up. But I was there on this small island, right? And I had like, oh my God, like getting things there was such a nightmare. Like every bag of grain was just so precious to me. Every bit of hops, every yeast. I lost so many kilos of yeast because they used to be, when it was imported, they checked the packages and it just, I mean.
Oh, they just open them up?
Yeah, they just thought they were like, they looked like bags of drugs if you didn't really know what you were doing. So they just cut them all open. Take the box back up, send it, and be like, you can still use it, right? It's like, yeah, cool, thanks, guys.
What a nightmare.
Yeah, and that would happen, and then it could take anywhere between a week and 6 months for things to show up. It was crazy logistics, like proper island life. Yeah. So I learned to be like really, really resource savvy, like super good with everything. You know, even bottles of gas were having to come over. CO2 was getting bought over from the US Virgin Islands. I was staying in the British Virgin Islands. So that was a whole like supply chain that was completely a mess. So I just got really good at it. And I realized there's actually, I didn't have any resources. So it's all just becoming more resourceful. It's all just being better with the processes. And I was like, that's the concept that really makes sense to me. And I think that it makes sense to a lot of the breweries out there who don't have the big £1 million, $1 million budgets, like the capex budget, but you can still be really, really, really efficient with what you do by just looking at your process. And I was like, I feel like this is something, and I've always wanted to have my own business. Like that was always on my radar my whole life. Thankfully, I didn't open my own brewery. God, that looks like hard work.
Well, you know, people ask me that, and I'm like, kind of at this stage of my life, you know, I'm approaching 50. You know, my kids are getting married. You know, maybe I'll be a grandfather at some point in the future. And the time requirement on that, the investment in that, like at this stage of my life, I'm like, I don't know if that's where I want my energies to go. And I do think sometimes I think people underestimate what chunk of your life it becomes in order to be able to, do it well, you know.
And the margins are pretty thin. It's a lot of capital cost. There's a lot of running costs. Like it's a stressful business to own. I think it's really fun. There's so many good perks of it, but it is a stressful business to own. And as I think we both talked about it before, it's just as there was a point in time where you could just open a brewery and you would just be successful, even if you didn't really need to understand how true businesses should operate. You know, some of the costs that were spiraling out during those times, especially even when I was brewing, some of the stuff we were doing was mental. And, like flying 5-6 brewers out to go get drunk at a festival in Denmark for like all expenses paid for 5 days.
Why not, baby?
What a time to be alive, honestly. What a time to be alive.
Yeah.
But, like, really, you just can't do that anymore. There's just not enough. It's changed. And it's just now it's like running it's now probably, I would say the romantic aspect of owning a brewery is probably eroded, and it is a business like any other business in any other part of the world. I think that transition is quite important for people to remember as well. It's not like the craft beer is gone. It's just that it's evolved into what every other market in the entire world does, which it has to be resource savvy. It has to be look after its cogs. It has to have a budgets, and everything has to like fit in. It has to have a big picture. It's a brand. It has to have emotion. It's no longer just, open up your car boot, sell some beers, open a brewery with your mates, sell some more beers, go to 100 festivals and everything's good. I mean, that was a good time, but it's not how reality is anymore.
Absolutely. So in your mind, when you think sustainability, when you think efficiency, what comes to mind for you? What's kind of at the core of that?
It's really interesting question, Adam, because I think this has changed. So if you were to ask me potentially even a few years ago or even last year, I probably would have had a different answer. But I genuinely think that sustainability has a bit of a branding problem. I think that a lot of people assume sustainability is environmentalism.
Mm-hmm.
So they go, I'm sustainable, I'm so good for the environment, or these are my green credentials, or this is our carbon footprint, or these are the offsets we're buying. And it's actually really just one part of the picture. Sustainability is, the way that I see it and the way that I frame it in my head is, we've been going for 5,000 years as an industry. We need to be going for another 5,000. And how do you do that? You have to have businesses within that industry that make profit. They have to make money and they have to pay their people and their suppliers. They also have to be good for the people. And I mean that as all stakeholders. So good for the people that employs, because that's an important part of running any successful business, is having people that feel valued, that trust the business, that care for it. And especially as a product like craft beer, which is so passion led, I think that's really important. But also that it ties in the community aspect. I think we lost it a little bit over the last 5 years or so. I think you made a really good point where breweries expand and they've come into, your example was 35 states. Here would be exporting to 35 countries in Europe or beyond. Like, all of a sudden you lose that community aspect. You're on every supermarket shelf. Those people and those core people around that don't really feel it anymore. So I feel that that's a really important part as well. So you've got the financial, the people, and then you've got the environmentalism as well, right? I mean, we need a planet to brew on. We need a planet to live on. So without it, none of this works. But that's the same thing for all three. I think a good analogy is like a three-legged stool. So you want all three to be in perfect balance in order to have a chair that works, a sustainable business. And any business that seeks either one of those three in abundance will always fail, in my opinion. If you go too far and you care too much about profit and you forget about people and the planet, your business will eventually fail because the people and the profit and the planet won't be there. Then if you go too far in the community aspect and the people and you don't make profit, you won't have a successful business. And the same with environmentalism. I see it as well as some people, not just in the brewing industry, but outside, people are going too far on the environmental aspect of it and they forget about the profitability side. And your business is bad for the environment if it goes under in the next 5 years, because you've purchased all of these things that all have a capital cost. So it's really important, I think, that sustainability is seen as this three-pronged approach. And where I come in is I barely even touch most of that surface, but I think that for sustainability, it's really key that people just move away from calling it the environmentalism and talk about profitability, talk about what you do for the community and how good you are for the people, your team, how good are you for the wider business, and then also your environmental credentials as well. So for me, that's how I would define it. That's how I see it. It's this whole big conceptual thing around having a successful and longevity of business.
Yeah. So like more of a holistic view. I think that's really, first of all, it makes a lot of sense. And I mentioned that we don't get into the nitty gritty on this stuff, but I don't know if but apparently it's sometimes things can be contentious politically, and I do think that some of those terms become politicized. But I think it's important to be able to have like a wider discussion. That's probably in general, but you know what I mean. But I do think it's not just one of those things. It is actually about hitting all those points, because it's in the same way. Like sometimes people will say, well, my plan is to have great beer with the business I'm opening. And it's like, that's wonderful, but that might only be one of the things that's going to help keep that chair standing up. You know what I mean? So there's all these other things that come into play there. And I really like that perspective on it.
Yeah. Politicized is the right word as well. Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, it's become polarizing. It's almost become an opinion. Yes. And I've heard so many people who say to me, love what you do, I just can't afford sustainability.
Yes.
And I just have to be like, I just remember hearing it and I was like, that's why I say I think sustainability has a branding problem, because how can you not afford to be sustainable?
Yes, it's actually part of it.
What's
Yeah.
in that sentence is complete. That's meanings. There's a complete flaw in one of those terms, and it's sustainability. Like it's become attached to environmentalism, and it needs to deject itself. And people need to look at business as all three of those things. So it's a great point.
Sometimes I feel like when we discuss our industry, we don't acknowledge the fact that there's a relatively large umbrella of what craft brewers are. We have folks that are working at larger production places where they're sending beer all over the place. And we have a lot of people that are making beer in small pubs where the beer never leaves the beer never leaves the brewery. Everything is poured through their taps. What do you feel? For me, I didn't start having my eyes opened by some of this stuff until I got into a larger production space that was doing quite a bit of distro and whatnot. Do you almost see it as two different tiers, or that one tier has different opportunities or advantages over the other when it comes to some of the sustainability stuff or efficiency stuff?
Yeah, it's really interesting. When you said I've worked in the bigger side, I've also worked in the smaller side, but now the last couple of years I've been Brew Resourceful. I've worked with all sizes, so I see it all. I think whilst look, capex budgets, the bigger you are, and the more you distribute, the more you sell, the bigger budgets you have, and they help because brewing equipment's expensive. It's just the latest technology, CO2 recapture, is expensive. Things cost money. But I have seen firsthand breweries who are producing a few thousand hectoliters a year be way more resource intensive than any of those bigger breweries. And I think a lot of it comes down to your attitude and your focus towards it. I think a really good example is Small Beer over here in the UK. They have a water ratio of 2.2 liters to make a liter of beer, which is insanely low. And the way that they've got there is just such a fascinating, I think it's just a mindset. It's just a fascinating, if they don't entirely be processed, they have an accountant basically within the team for water. So they'll go, this is the exact amount of water we're going to use tomorrow as a budget. So and if they have more, someone's made an error and they have to go back and chase it. If they use less, then they'll change that budget for the next day. And through that process, they've got it down. So now that their HLT is completely emptied in their brew and it's completely topped up to exactly where they need to be. They also have something a bit more radical as well. It's called a dry floor policy.
Okay.
So get this, their brewery doesn't have drains. Yeah, I know. And everyone's like, what do you mean?
Right.
Well, you're going to have to do a lot of explaining here. So of course, things like work kettle, etc., the brew house, they are piped out, but there is no floor drain for anything to go down. So no brewer can hose down the floor because there is nowhere for that water to go. And they found that basically it started with the logic of they want to use water, right? Really resource intensive. It's a passion thing. Something Felix felt really strongly about. And when they were designing the brewery, he'd been speaking to a bartender and they were like, the cleanest bar is a dry bar. When things are wet, that's where bacteria grows. Has a fair valid point. So he took that concept and said, why can't I apply it to the brewery floor? So they have a wet and dry vac to clean the floor. So the floor is cleaned. But they just don't spill anything on the floor. So I've been there. It's fascinating. So where brewery hoses disconnect, they have like a little bucket underneath and they'll catch every dribble of it. And I'm watching it going and then no one's hosing down the floor. And I was like, if you told me in 2016 that I couldn't stand there with my hose and spray everything I possibly could in a 4-meter radius, I'd be absolutely fuming. It'd be like you're taking away my coffee. I'd be like, what do you mean this is therapy to me? It's really cool. But I feel that's what I'm saying. It's whilst big breweries do amazing things, and there are things that they can do in terms of especially decarbonization that most small breweries just won't have access to technological wise. But actually, so much of it is driven by process, and that's achievable on every scale. And the thing about efficiency is it's all about percentages, really.
Mm-hmm.
So the cash value of what you save or what a brewery saves sounds good, but it's really the percentages, because that's what applies to every brewery. And those intensity metrics of like kilowatt hours per hectoliter package, like they're the ones that apply to every brewery, but have relevancy at every level. So, you know, if your brewery is selling 1,000 hectoliters a year, that, you know, 25, 50 kilos of malt is worth more to you than if someone's brewing 100. But that's how these intensity metrics work. So I think it's every level, and it's at the end of the day, it's cost of goods sold. That's how you get people to motivate themselves, especially the higher up, like the higher levels, to be like, we're just focusing on our cost of goods sold. And that's what it is.
Yeah. So let's dip into some of the things. If if I were to come to you as a brewer or an owner of a brewery and say, hey, listen, we need to tighten things up on the efficiency, sustainability side. What are some of, just if you just had to close your eyes and guess, and say, hey, I think I can save you some things here. What are some of those kind of high point areas that almost everybody is missing some percentage on of efficiency?
Yeah, this is it's a question I always get asked as well. Everyone's looking for these silver bullets of efficiency, and some of them they do exist in some places. The key is the first thing to do in every brewery, and the first thing, if anyone ever comes to me, the first thing I'll say is you need a measure. You need to know those metrics. So there's 6 metrics that I judge a brewery's efficiency by, which is brewhouse efficiency, water intensity, so that's liter to liter, electricity per hectoliter, packaged natural gas or any sort of thermal energy per hectoliter package, CO2, because that's a really important one over here, cost-wise, and then finally your losses, which is obviously one of the big ones, your seller losses, packaging losses, etc. So I say that the first step for everyone, even if you listen to what I'm about to tell you, but I will give you some really good it's like key ways to save and ways to do it. That's the first step. Like, just get a hold of it. They're really simple numbers to calculate. The only one that has marginal complexity is brewhouse efficiency, but I think as brewers, everyone kind of knows how to calculate that. And then that's the key, because that will tell you where you need to focus your attention on. So if your electricity is 50 kilowatt hours per hectoliter, just focus all your energy on there, because you're going to get the most resource. You're going to have to find the easiest wins. They're going to be the biggest. They're going to save you the most money. It's like, they're the things. That's how I'd always say split it, because otherwise you're kind of chasing in the dark. You're looking for things you won't really learn. You won't know. You might spend some time on your CO2 intensity, which is actually the best metric. So all you're going to be getting is real marginal gains. So build that picture, start that baseline. Like, that's, I think, key for everyone. In those areas, I can definitely run through some of the things that I see most commonly.
Sure.
So brew house efficiency, really, really neat trick with brew house efficiency. Let's say you start doing it, is split brew house efficiency into mash lauter efficiency and brew house efficiency. So that means taking those numbers from the kettle up volume and the kettle up density and comparing that to your usual malt COAs, and then also your brew house efficiency. And those differences will tell you where you're inefficient, whether it's in the mash lauter or whether it's in the whether you're losing it from the work kettle to the fermenter. If that's the case, in the brew house, I mean, everyone talks about it, the mill settings. I feel like everyone, as soon as you say brew house efficiency, everyone goes, adjust the mill. It works. I'm not going to lie. It's the easiest one. Get the sieves out and adjust that mill, tighten that up. You'll be surprised how tight they can really go, actually. I think, especially with British malt, I mean, you can get those a lot tighter than what most people think. And then a lot of it's to do with the last runnings as well. I see a lot of brewers who last runnings a lot of that's going down to the drain. So that's a really resource intensive, because that's hot water that you're using, which is expensive. Then it's also diluting your last runnings too much. and B, it's going into the waste. So you have to pay for that to be wasted. So it's like really is quite an expensive mistake to make. You really want that wort to be going in the wort kettle as the Lewington runs out. Like that's the goal, and you shouldn't really be settling for anything else. I know a lot of brewers just always want to hit kettle up volume. So they're like, just put an extra 50 liters in, put an extra 100 liters in. But that 100 liters is costing you a lot. Another one is, especially if you have an external calandria or any sort of calandria, an external boiling device. A really good example, this basically, if that's not flushed out, that's crazy. A really good example of this is a brewery I worked at, it was last year, I think. So calandria, it never got pushed out because it was actually a program error, really. That it was never really programmed to push out. So everyone was like, it's just a little bit of work. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, here we go. Eyes light up. So that was 80 liters. I looked at the calandria volume, 80 liters. So that 80 liters, they brew 200 times a year, represented 160 hectoliters of wort a year, which is the equivalent of them brewing the first 4 brews down the drain.
Yes.
And I was like, would you brew the first 4 beers of the year straight to the drain? They were like, no. I was like, exactly. But that's exactly what you're doing with this. And that's a lot of it is just framing. It's like, okay, I see a little bit here. It's those little bits, times those by 200, times those by 300. And all of a sudden it starts to look like a lot. And then finally whirlpooling. A lot of that is tied up into the sort of the geometry of the whirlpool. But the key is just always look for at least 3 meters per second of velocity into the whirlpool. Anything less than that, you won't be forming a solid trub cake, and there's just going to be a bunch of losses in there. And finally, I would say just don't be afraid to make changes to your kettles. A lot of the time I've been there and they're like, okay, well, look, we just got this standpipe that sits up and we just lose 3 hectoliters of wort every time. There's nothing we can do about it. Oh, no, you actually can do quite a lot about it. You can cut it out if you really want. They're like, oh, this is like, just don't be afraid. Get a welder in there. It's just don't be afraid to make changes. Just do your calculations, make the changes. I think that's brewhouse is always, you always feel like once you've got it, that's it. It's unchangeable. But actually, for a marginal amount, you can save it, and you save those 3 hectoliters a brew. That's substantial. So
sure.
I think that's always a good one. Water, as I said, the dry fall policy is far too radical for most brewers. So I probably wouldn't recommend that. I think I'd be laughed out of the room if I recommended that to most brewers. But that, do you know what? CIP, it's just always CIP where it falls short, and that's where those numbers really start to reach. I told you right at the start, I worked a lot on CIP, like over a year on it. So I got a really good understanding of it. Just split it into those 4 principles, which is time, temperature, chemical concentration, mechanical action. If you can work all 4 of those out, you can really start to lean in on them where you need to. So you can reduce that chemical concentration, reduces the rinsing. That's a really nice way. Also, just rinse steps themselves, like burst rinsing over continuous. Always easy fix to do, saves like 30% of the water. Making sure you standardize it as well. Don't leave it up to however that person is going to rinse it that day. Whether they're managing 6 things or 1 is going to mean they're going to use different water. Set a timer or have a phenolphthalein check, etc. There's loads of ways you can do that. But CIP is such a hot, and that's where water goes, in my opinion. That and packaging. If you're running like an old school bottler, I've seen plenty of those here. That's a lot of water being used, especially on like can rinsing and bottle rinsing. It's kind of a crazy liquid to rinse a small pack out with. Actually, in hindsight, when you really think about it, it's like let's spend all of our effort making sure there's no oxygen in, and then just leave a bunch of full of oxygen in there. Like it's just like Sure. Surely there's a better way. There is. So that's always good areas. Electricity, always a refrigeration plant's the first place I go. If someone's like, I've got a problem with electricity, I'd be like, I wouldn't even talk to anyone. I just walk straight to that refrigeration plant. It's the forgotten child of every brewery, right? Honestly, the poor thing is just left to work tirelessly outside. stops working. You go like, why aren't you working?
What are some of the big things that people neglect when it comes to their refrigeration plant, chiller, what have you?
I mean, just some basic maintenance stuff, to be honest, making sure the refrigerant's topped up. It's simple. That's like an easy one.
Do you feel as if it's stuff that really any brewer, because we all have different skill sets.
Yeah.
And there's some things I won't touch in a brewery. I don't touch the electrical panel on the brew house or anything like that. But are there some non-invasive things that on the chiller side that we can be implementing, even as people that do not have like really any expertise in the subject?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I'm not a massive refrigeration expert. I'm not an engineer, and I too would not be anywhere near the brewhouse electrical panel. So yeah, I think that a really good one is to start with the set points, right? So what is your set point of your glycol? A lot of people, I mean, I'm going to talk in Celsius here.
Yep.
You said not to get political, so I'm not going to talk about I'm not going to talk
well,
about
that's unpolitical.
I didn't come up here to talk about how ridiculous it is. But most people here set it to -4 Celsius, but if their lowest their beer gets to is 2 degrees, for example, there's absolutely that is just a misuse. A really good rule of thumb, again, I don't know how to apply it to Fahrenheit, but for every -1 degree you're off from 0 is an additional 3% electrical demand for that for your chiller. So if you can change that from -4 to -3 to -1, that's 9% electricity saved right there, which is a lot because refrigeration plants generally are about 40%. Like about 40% of your energy. I got that from the Brewers Association of the Americas. I sometimes see it like 70% when it's really hammering. And the other thing is like loading as well. I've seen some systems where just basically they want to be on for long periods of time and then off. If you can just go and stand by your refrigeration plant, if you hear it clicking on and off, or you can go into the system and log those compressor starts. If they're starting too often, like you want about probably 6 in a 12-hour period in an ideal world, 6 to 10. I've been at breweries that have been like 50, 60. But it's just on and on and on and on. And that's because it's the system itself is too big for the glycol unit's too big. So it's just not handling the load correctly. You kind of want an undersized one. It's kind of the dream position to be in. Just most breweries are really fearful of it. Because they're just like, the last thing I want to do is run out of cooling capacity, when actually, reality, you probably rarely would. But if you have a massive unit and you're running it, you're just going to be hemorrhaging that electricity out of it.
Sure. Sure. And there's also that notion too, where it's like, well, we're gonna buy a whole lot more cooling right now because we're gonna be growing anyways. You know what I mean? Yeah. So yeah, not to even get started on how much folks tend to overbuy when they're starting a place. But so that's interesting. So spinning off of that, I've worked at a handful of places over here, and I've seen some different approaches. Some people will take that beer that is done fermenting past, VDK, past sensory, everything, and then crash it straight down to 0 or 32, 33, what have you. And I've worked at other places that have done stepped crashings. They go a little bit here, so a lot of times end of the day I can crash a tank, and when I get in the next morning it's all the way down at 0 or all the way down at 33. Are there advantages with your crashing regimen, do you think? What's been your experience at breweries? Do you just crash them straight down to 0? What do you tend to do?
Yeah, it's kind of like say horses for courses. So it's kind of like depends on really what your brewery wants to do in terms of energy efficiency. It's difficult. There's a few factors in there. I think what's more important is when you cool, rather than, especially here, it's when you cool, not how you cool. So if you're on a crash, if you load all of your tanks all at the same time and your refrigeration plant can't keep up, then that's not good, because then it's going to delay your things. But we also have like off-peak and on-peak rates here. So if you're using electricity between, especially around like 4 p.m. till sort of 7 p.m., then your rate is more per kilowatt hour than if you're doing it at 2 in the morning. And that's just the way they try and manage the grid here. But a lot of brewers, I definitely wasn't when I was brewing, consider that. They'll just crash all the tanks 4 o'clock before they leave. And all of a sudden, that refrigeration plant's sweating outside, and it's really using a lot of expensive energy. So I always say it's better to do it you want to do it when, but also if you have solar panels, you want to be doing that during the day. You want to be scheduling those in so they absolutely nail it on time. Yeah. So it's more kind of depending on your system and what energy you're purchasing. As I said before, though, it is your refrigeration plant wants to work. So if you're stepping it down and it's not really, and those compressor starts are going on and off and on and off and on and off, then it's costing you a lot more in energy to cool that tank, to do it in steps. I've generally just crashed throughout my career, and just then now what I do with Brew Resourceful is we look at when we should crash it and how much we should crash. And if we can stack 3 or 4, is that beneficial for the size of the cooling capacity of the refrigeration plant? Then yeah, great. Then let's make sure we crash them all at the same time, all at like 12 p.m. Or 12 a.m. Sorry, and then or 12 p.m. depending on if you've got solar panels, and get those down then. So I think that's really the key is when, not how.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. From a lot of times, we had that conversation before, and we said, kind of the first step is getting in and measuring. What are some things that, when we were kind of talking about on saving, actually something I wanted to ask about is, what are some of your tips for reducing that CO2 gas usage? Because different people use, different setups. I know I've worked at breweries that have, spunded beer, depending on how you pronounce that. Places that are forced carbonating in different ways. Like there's plenty of folks by me that will say bleed and feed, right? They'll be bleeding CO2, or they'll be feeding CO2 into the carb stone and then bleeding it out of the vent on the top. It's basically just trying to blast it in quickly. What are some of your thoughts on the CO2 gas side of things?
Yeah, I've been a part of all of those breweries. The way that you carbonate was very dictated by how busy you were.
Yeah.
You're like, that beer needs to be packed in 2 days. Well, let's just cram it in there.
Rip it in there, man.
That efficiency number straight out of the window. Who cares about that? Sales want that beer. So yeah, I mean, always there's a pinch of salt in this. The production schedule is always the ruler of what happens in a brewery, to be honest. But actually, to be honest, the carbonation aspect is pretty minimal. You probably, if your brewery uses 5 kilos per hectoliter, which is pretty much average, probably 0.7, 0.8 kilos is just going in carbonation. So if you're listening it coming out the sidearm, then that's going to be a bit more. That's a pretty good rule. If you can hear it, then you've lost it, especially in carbonation. I mean, low and slow has been a method that we used quite often. So we would leave them, slowly carbonating overnight. I don't know if that's particularly the wisest idea, but again, we were very bound by production schedules.
Sure.
But yeah, we keep them slow and just try not to spun things as much. You shouldn't be really hearing too much CO2 coming out when you're carbonating. But really the key is like purging. That's where it goes. Tank purging, especially if you're moving beer from tank to tank and you're purging, that's where your CO2 will be going if it's not monitored correctly. I also really like to question a lot of the specifications on tank purges as well. A lot of people, it was pretty common here to be like 50 ppb or 100 ppb and below on your tank purge, and it's just not actually that necessary, especially with the headspace. So we ended up much closer to 300. And, just like everyone says. But yeah, we didn't have any DO pickup from that. So
Sure.
I always think you can purge.
And
a lot
just to be clear, it was measured DO pickup. So you
Exactly,
actually,
yeah.
well, because sometimes people listen and they're like, well, yeah. Sometimes people are like, well, I don't have a problem, but you're actually talking about something that you're measuring.
Yeah,
How do talk to me about the, you know, how does that work? Because as brewers, we always want to see that number as low as possible. What's actually happening in that tank? And again, you're not saying don't purge or anything like that. Of course. But what is, what's going on there that allows that to still be a good quality practice for us there in the brewery?
Yeah. So basically you got that headspace, right? So that you're going to have some transfer of gas. That's physics. So it's going to move a little bit, but your CO2 is denser, and your CO2 will more like it's going to basically equalize out. So your equilibrium will be hit when the CO2 leaves, not when the DO goes in. That being said, the only time that if temperature changes, that will change. So if the beer warms up, that gas diffusion changes. So therefore you are likely to pick up a bit more. But again, we're talking for like 15,200 ppb. I think people often get, that might be the word confused, or just they mix them up with DO and like headspace. So like what's in that gas is not what's in your beer. So if you see 300, it's not, I think it's a panic sign, so it might slip in. But yeah, simply, it's not always it doesn't really quite work like that. So yeah.
I've got a question coming in from Brew and Kittery. Your thoughts on using a nitrogen generator in the brew house to push beer around to save on CO2, something like the Nematech machines. You don't have to be able to speak specifically to that brand, but again, for everybody that's out there live, thank you for the questions. Drop them in if it fits in well. We're glad to have you all in here. Good to see you in here. And so make sure to drop those questions. But Chris, what are your thoughts on the nitrogen generators?
Yeah, great question. I've done so much work on this because I think one of the passions of what I do is trying to remove purchased CO2 from a brewery. I really dislike the industry where it comes from, especially over here. It's mainly fertilizer, ammonia-based fertilizer production. This byproduct. It's just full of, I don't know. It feels a bit like a racket over here as well. I just don't trust the whole system, and most people don't. So been working so much on trying to remove purchased CO2, and a nitrogen generator is truly a fantastic way of removing, obviously not 100%, because you will need some for carbonation. But from the experience and the trials that we've ran, you can replace the majority. So you're looking at like sort of 80 to 85% of your purchased CO2 with generated nitrogen. It has a lot of benefits over CO2, especially around tank pushes. So if you are packaging a bright beer tank, and if you push that out with nitrogen instead of CO2, nitrogen doesn't react negatively with caustic, so you don't have that risk of implosion. You don't have the carbonate buildup, sodium carbonate buildup, which really kills the effectiveness of your cleaning. So, and you don't have to vent a tank, so you can almost go straight in. You can flush and CIP almost straight away after. That's a huge time saving in a brewery, like a huge one, especially in a busy production brewery. That's like a lot. So there's some really good stuff. It's also a much safer gas for brewers to be around as well. So CO2 is a toxic asphyxiant. So even in like fairly lowish levels, so not life-threatening or life-changing levels, it basically gives you, it starves oxygen to your brain. So you'll get headaches, your cognitive ability drops, and generally has quite a lot of long-term side effects, which probably happens quite a lot in breweries because a lot of people work in CO2 environments without really realizing it. So I think generally it's a safer gas. It is generated from air, so from an air compressor, which is great. It does have a few things you need to get used to. One, it's a lighter gas than air, or lighter gas than oxygen, sorry. So it makes it quite a difficult gas to purge with. The trials that I did was with a brewery here called Gypsy Hill in London. And we found some really cool stuff out. We were using different purities as well. But if you go in through the top, through the sidearm, and out the bottom, as opposed to through the bottom, out the sidearm, which I think a lot of people do, then that really sped up the purging process. But that's a very different. That takes a bit of time to get used to, and it's very dependent on the brewery and the flow rates, etc. And also the storage aspect of it. So the sizing and storage is completely different to the way that we use CO2. So CO2 is liquefied and stored. So it means that even if you have a 1 ton, 5 ton tank out the back, that's a lot of CO2 that's liquefied as a gas. But with nitrogen, you can only store it as a gas. You're not liquefying it. So that means your storage is almost next to none, and you have to generate as you require. Yes. So now it's really important when you're calculating and sizing it, you understand how much you might be stacking at one point. So if you're canning, if you're kegging, and then you're tank purging, that means you have to have a generator big enough to cope with all three of those things happening at the same hour. It's a really key thing, because the storage is basically, it'll last you an hour if that, and most places a lot less. But it's a really good gas. The purity is really important. You can buy, there's two types of technology for nitrogen generators. They have membrane technology and then pressure swing absorption. The main difference, I'm going to go into it, but the main difference is that pressure swing absorption will get you a much purer nitrogen. I've seen upwards of 99.97, 98, which is more than enough for brewery application, and is used in canning as well, which I think is probably the most critical aspect of a brewery. So hasn't used that. Membrane, far cheaper as a technology, and it's capable of doing about 99.5. It can go up to 99.7, 99.8. Perfectly used for a purge gas or for a pushing out tanks, etc. That all works. The only thing that is different with nitrogen, again, is because it's now a different gas in that headspace. So over bigger headspace and over longer periods of time, you might see a bigger movement of CO2 out of the beer as it tries to equalize in the headspace. Again, these aren't things to put people off. They're just things to be aware of, and it's just a process tweaking.
Sure. So I've had some folks comment in the past on with beer transfers, and just so you know, if I ever ask you something that you feel as if is outside your wheelhouse, that's completely fine, because I just riff like when I'm talking to people. Yeah. So I tell people all the time, I don't know what that is. So if I ask you something, definitely don't sweat it. So I've had people talk to me before about, I've always transferred beers with CO2. I've pushed beers with gas. And I've had some folks talk to me about that I should be using, ultimately my CIP pump, and creating an umbilical between the two tanks. So connecting the CIP arm or vent or whatever between the two tanks, obviously, purging that out and everything like that too, or blowing gas through there on the connection. And then ultimately at some stage utilizing a pump in order to transfer that beer, keeping speed of transfer in mind, because that's something that through the years I've gotten more sensitive to, both for, potentially O2 pickup, foam stability, different things like that, not just wanting to rip the beer from tank to tank. What are your thoughts on utilizing an umbilical like that and using a pump?
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I kind of remember what we used to call it. Umbilical is a good one.
It's a very human.
Yeah,
it's very human.
It's so gross.
I know.
Of like an umbilical cord between two tanks. I think we just call it like a balance line or something.
Yeah, balance line. That's what I'm using. That's what I'm using in the future. So one of the things.
No, it makes perfect sense, because you don't have to. Basically, you can just move the gas from one place to another. It hits equilibrium.
And so then it's just then you're drawing it like that. So the
otherwise
question, one of the questions I had is
I'm thinking
I've worked with a wide range of pumps in my career, and in general, they stink. I've worked with a lot of cheap pumps. I worked with CIP pumps that can be rebuilt by me, rebuilt by a professional. It doesn't seem to matter. No matter what I do with this thing, this pump always seems to leak a little bit. But mostly, I'm throwing around. I'm throwing around chemical with it. Okay. So that's one of the reasons I've always avoided something like that. Is I haven't always loved the pumps that I'm using. Do you think that makes sense? If you have a situation where you're using a CIP pump, or I don't have a really deep knowledge yet because I know there's different types of pumps. Can you speak to that at all? Anything that I'm rambling about here?
Yeah, centrifugal pump, same that we would use for a CIP. In fact, the exact same one we would use for the return of the CIP. We would likely be using that for the pump from one tank to another. Sure. Should we have done it? But we were more. In fact, no, we had to, because of the centrifuge. So we were pumping everything into the centrifuge, and it was coming out the other end, and then we're balancing the tanks between the two as well. I mean, I've never had a specific issue. We did we microchecked just about everything ever. It felt like for quite a few years. We were really, really ham on that. So I've never really had a problem with it. I mean, the only time where a centrifugal pump can start to become an issue is, well, especially in yeast transfers, just the sheer force of them can damage yeast cells. But if you're going into a separator, generally that's not an issue. If you're transferring a hazy beer, then shear force would be something I would probably consider. But I haven't really moved beer like that in about 4 or 5 years, so I can't say I'm well on top of it. But I know that we've done that. I've done that for years. And then yeast. Just with the yeast, that's the only time that we would use just top pressure to move things was with yeast. Because you want low shear on that, especially if you're going to use it and repitch it. You shouldn't really be pumping that. We actually had a large issue for a while. So we had a Hopnik. I don't know if you've ever seen them. There was a Braucon, I believe. I think it was Braucon invention. I might just be doing them a massive, so probably shouldn't have said that. But basically it's a bowl where you load the hops, and then the hops get pushed in with CO2 in line on recirculation. But the pump has a macerator in it. Which was great for breaking up hops, but we always had quite a bit of yeast still in suspension, and it was hemorrhaging that yeast. We were having like really, really big hop creep problems. A bit of extra sulfur. It was it was pretty gnarly. So we've always been really since that moment. We were pretty cautious with moving yeast with centrifugal pumps. I mean, not that many have macerators on, but even with that.
Sure. What are some things? What are some things that we haven't talked about yet on the sustainability efficiency front? That's kind of popping in your head right now. Something that we don't want to leave out of the conversation.
Yeah, there's definitely one. Mainly because I came back off a meeting just last week about it. It's one of the most fascinating novel boiling techniques that I've ever heard of. It's been around for a while. This is not new technology. It was actually patented by AB InBev, but they very kindly allow anyone who makes less than 1 million hectoliters a year, which is quite a lot of the people I know, use it for free. So the idea is that instead of boiling for 60 minutes and hitting that evaporation rate of anywhere, I mean, I don't know where brewers, some brewers are at 10, 12%, some are down at 4, 5, 6, but we'll take the average is probably 6% evaporation rate, which is how you determine how hard you boil and how much energy you use when you boil. But instead of that, what they say is you can replace at least 5% of that. So you're only boiling evaporation rate, it should be less than 1%. But in order to get the volatiles out of the boil, you are stripping with a gas. So it's called simmer and strip. That's the technology. But it's super basic. It can be applied into any kettle retrospectively. It's using, generally you want to be using either generated nitrogen, just like the person commented on, or recaptured CO2. And you're bubbling out the volatiles while still hitting the major points of all key concepts of all the boils. You generally want to boil for about a few minutes before at the start and a few minutes at the end. Because you want that protein you really want that protein coagulation in the first 10 minutes, which you get. But yeah, it's an amazingly cool concept. It's been applied into loads of breweries already. It was actually originally designed to increase shelf life. So the thermal loading on the wort has decreases the shelf life of lager beer. So that was the concept. So that's how this came about. It had nothing to do with energy saving whatsoever. It was designed at a time where, energy was peanuts. So people just were throwing it everywhere. And now it's become this really cool concept of saving a lot of energy, because you can reduce the amount of energy used to boil by at least 60 to 70%, which is amazing. And that's why I'm doing some research with the University of Nottingham over here. We have a brewing department and a craft brewery here as well. And we're going to put some trials out and hopefully write a nice big case study about, the sensory impact, the fuel impact, the cost savings potential, etc. And I feel like this is could be a really key part of craft breweries' future of decarbonization. Because the most difficult emissions to decarbonize are your scope 1 emissions, which are your fuel that you burn for energy. So difficult. There's just nothing that really replaces steam right now, and replaces gas-fired steam or oil-fired steam, or however you get there. Electric-fired steam is possible on a very, very, very small scale, and if you have a very, very cheap energy deal. But at the moment, it's still nowhere near. It's still way more expensive here than the cost of gas. It just will never be an answer. So how do we decarbonize our scope 1 emissions? This is the best opportunity to get close to decarbonization anyway. So I think it's got a bright future. And it's already been, as I said, it's already been used by, hundreds of breweries around the world, with quality departments 3 times the size of most of the floor prints of breweries that I know. So I'm really confident in it. It's just, we've got to make it work for the craft brewing scene. So yeah, keep your eyes out on that, because we're working.
That's super interesting. And so just to rehash, just to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. So you're bringing your kettle up to something less than 100C or 212F. Is it like 98C? Is that 99. What you're bringing it up to? 99?
Yeah, 99. And then you want to just keep it on with a bit of heat on for the first 5 to 10 minutes. We haven't done the full trials yet, but this is this is around there. And then you simmer. Then you strip. So then you bring in the gas, and that gas phase is there's a really good document written. Basically, that pattern for AB and Bev, you can get hold of it if you get it, and they'll send it to you, which is pretty cool. And which I've seen, so I can help answer questions. I can't obviously. It's a really weird situation. I can't give loads. I can't go through the exact details of the document.
Yeah.
But I can explain quite a lot about it. They're really good about people using it. But yeah, then you can just, it's basically like a ring that you put in, and you just into the bottom of your kettle, and you purge out. So you're using gas bubbles instead of, the way I frame it to people is, you're using hopefully recaptured CO2 or generated nitrogen to replace expensive steam bubbles, because steam bubbles are very expensive.
Yes.
But what they're doing is, the main function of them inside the boil is to strip.
Yes.
That's their main function. So we're going to replace the majority of that with gas instead of expensive steam bubbles. Really cool.
That is very cool. That's a cool thing. I'm gonna have to dig into that, because it's funny, because sometimes when you just learn things at a functional level, your brain doesn't take that jump. You know what I mean? To actually looking at that, it's like, well, of course we need this, and sometimes it's actually just that stripping as well. That's very, very fascinating. Yeah, that's very fascinating. So I'm looking forward to that stuff coming out, the research that you're doing coming out on it too, and digging into that some myself with the AB information. That's really something. Well, listen, we're kind of running down. Is there anything that you want to be able to tell us about Modern Brewer Podcast, Brew Resourceful? Where can we follow you? Stuff like that.
Yeah, man, absolutely. So the Modern Brewer Podcast is available on Spotify, Apple, basically any podcasting platform you go on. If it doesn't, please contact me because it should be there. It comes out about once a month. I've got to admit, look, it's the thing I do on top of the other things that I do. So it's not always like the most structured it comes out, but it comes out when the episode is good and ready. I just did one on refrigeration plants, actually. Literally just did one on how to size it, the importance of sizing it, and also the heat recovery that's potentially available. The brewery I just worked with, we're going to recover like 500 hectoliters of 50-degree water a day from a 100 kilowatt refrigeration plant. It's insane. So that we're going to be going into detail on that. The next one that's coming out is on NA beers. So NA beers and how dangerous are they to public health? There's a real rising trend here on non-alcoholic beers, and a lot of them are unpasteurized in the craft world, and some of them are unfiltered, unpasteurized, and we just need to understand how dangerous they are because you no longer have the protection of alcohol. So can E. coli grow? Salmonella, all these things that generally cause people harm, can grow in theory in NA beer. So I've got a renowned one, probably the leading mind on this, who works at Camden BRI. So we're going to go through that. That's really exciting. So yeah, all of that happens on the podcast. Where you can hear about it from me is I'm pretty active on LinkedIn for those people who are on there. I do have Instagram as well. So my LinkedIn is just Chris Lewington. And that's my name. And my Instagram is Chris _ 2 _ and Brewington, because I thought that'd be really funny when I first did it.
I like it, man. I
have to say it out loud all the time. I'm like, God, I really wish I just put Lewington like a normal person. And then I also have on my website, so Brew Resourceful, there's a ton of free tools on there. Brewhouse free efficiency calculator, utility metric calculators. I benchmark people's results for free. So if your brewery has those data or records those data, I'll benchmark it against all the other breweries who have submitted to my sort of benchmarking tool, which is we're coming up not too far off 200 now, which is pretty cool. So I'll benchmark it against that whole network, and then also breweries of a similar size. It's all anonymous. So it's not like no one will know who they are, but it's quite a fun exercise. And then I have a mailing list on there, sustainability reports, a whole bunch. So my website is brewresourceful.com, and there's like just a ton of stuff on there. I hope that people would find interesting should they care about sustainability, efficiency, or anything to do with running brewery operations. I think a lot of stuff from there, and that's basically my life in those two.
Yeah. And, I usually don't, I've had people that, work for a business or have their own business, and I don't always go in this direction with them, but you and I are in a similar vein, kind of doing our own thing. So go ahead and tell people about, specifically, how to reach out for you, the range of stuff that you do with Brewed Resourceful, and so you can business pitch a little bit too, because sometimes people feel awkward, and I often don't ask for that, but feel free to let people know kind of the range of ways that you can help them, the kind of services you offer, things like that.
Of course. And also, Adam, I'm British, so talking about myself becomes immensely painful for me. I'm like recoiling it, like centuries of emotional repression. I'm just like, oh my God. I have to talk about myself.
You just have to say what you do. You don't have to talk about your character. Okay. So yeah.
Quickly shut it down. Yeah, so funny. So look, Brew Resourceful, it can basically help any brewery of any size with their efficiency. I go at it from a completely process-based angle. It can come in any bind. I would say the first step is always to understand where you're at, pitch onto the benchmark, and I always offer a free consultation one-on-one with me, and we'll go through those numbers together. And I can be like, this is high, this is what we can do to help save it. And I think that's a really nice way of making sure that the person on the other end, the brewery, the brewer, can see what I can do to help, and actually help themselves see what they can see as well. So I always think that's the best part. I run but I also give a lot of like educational stuff away on the podcast, on my LinkedIn, like a ton of stuff on my LinkedIn as well. I've written cheat sheets, all sorts of things for people to go on. So I give a lot away for free because I generally think is really important. And where I can, where I come in to help is to help you get there. So I always think that everyone can have the resources, all the resources in the world, but the time to execute them is always where a lot of breweries, especially breweries, fall short because everyone's just so busy. I've been on that production floor myself for many years. I know how busy it is. And the concept of like having to, think about the refrigeration plant for a day or two or a week or 3 weeks to record the data is quite, time consuming and quite a lot. But that's exactly where I come in. I come in with a laser focus. I charge entirely based on the amount saved as well. So it's all relative cost. There's no one's going to think it's too expensive because it can't be, because it'll only be reflective of how much we save. So that's how.
Do you work outside the UK?
Yeah, I do actually. Yeah, I work a bunch. So I worked in Europe. I haven't worked in the States, but I work in Europe. A lot of my stuff I can do remotely.
Yes.
And then I've also been I help a lot of breweries on CapEx spends as well. So, I think it's a really key point to get across is a lot of breweries, not just here in the UK, but I think globally, are probably one major financial investment going wrong away from closing. So it's really, really important that those ROIs, the return on investment calculations, are good. And that requires a lot of feasibility work on the brewer's end. Like, it's not, my golden rule is never, ever trust a supplier's return on investment. It's not that they're bad people. It's that they just don't know your process like you do.
Yes.
And I have seen so many bad ROIs that people have made investments on. It's really, really key that people don't do that. I'm actually going to start running some courses more soon on how to do those return on investments and stuff. But ultimately, I can do those for you, and I can help customize and do some work on that. And I do a lot of work with brewers here in the UK and in Europe on that as well, we make sure that the investment they're making is what they're going to get back. And there's a lot of times they go, "Oh Lord,
yeah,
I can't believe it's like that in reality." I'm so glad. So even if it's not me, just make sure that someone's doing those ROI calculations properly and those feasibilities.
Definitely. And just a side note, because things can be, Chris has gone out of his way to help me personally. We both have our own things going on. And sometimes when you're getting started off doing something, it's difficult to set parameters and do different things. And, he shared information with me that people don't usually share about how they're putting everything together and doing their thing. So he's done some personal favor as well. So if you're following me and you're not following Chris, make sure to give him a follow. Check out the podcast. Check out the website. Especially if you are looking to tighten things up on the efficiency and sustainability side, which quite frankly, we all should be. And like I said, not everybody does a solid for somebody they've talked to 2 times. So tip of the hat on that. And thanks to everybody out there. This is the first time that an Instagram live has actually worked. So it was good to see everybody in the chat. We're going to have more stuff coming up. Just stay tuned if you're not following my Instagram. But I appreciate y'all joining us. And we'll catch you next time. I appreciate you coming on, Chris.
Thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate it, man. It's been super fun.
Absolutely. Hold on just a second after this thing, and I'll chat with you.
Always.
Have a great day, everybody.
Hey, everyone.
This feeling's deeper than an ocean, with a groove that's beating harder than my heart. So baby, now just hear me out. No, don't fear this emotion, 'cause you can't stop the fire.